morning. Welcome to the launch webinar for the BVCA and Level 20 Diversity Inclusion Report 2023. This report looks at the representation of women and people of other ethnicities working in the private equity and venture capital industry. I'm delighted to be joined today by an all-star cast. Let me introduce the panel. Joining me today, we have Rebecca Gibson, partner at Oakley Capital, Pam Jackson, one of my co-authors, CEO of Level 20 from 2019 until last month, and kindly joining us today, Wol Kolade, managing partner at Livingbridge, Michael Moore, Chief Executive at BVCA, and last but by no means least, Cheryl Potter, Chair at Level 20. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so presenting the findings, during which time I'll ask the panel to go off screen and they can listen along as well, and hopefully we'll have a nice big screen to look at. I'll talk you through the numbers. I'll invite them all to come back and discuss the findings afterwards. As we go, just to flag that this is a live Q&A, so apologies in advance if any technical issues, and that we do have a chat for questions. Please send them in either as we go or at the end, and we'll do our best to answer them. So let's look at the gender results first, starting with the headline figures. Let's look at the big picture. We can see in terms of the context of the study that this is a big study. We've got information from 268 firms in our study, covering over 13,500 individuals. In order to be included in our study, firms had to have a physical UK presence and an active investment program. How did we collect the data? The data came firstly from a survey of BVCA and Level 20 members, and for the gender data, we supplemented that with information from public sources. Where possible, we've collected information by function, so that's investment and non-investment roles, also by seniority, as well as by gender and ethnicity. This allows us to cut the data in a number of different ways. For the first time this year, we've also collected information on UK office staff only. UK office staff only. This allows us, again, to look at the data in a slightly more granular way. Let's step forward and look at the headline gender results to start with. So, as we can see on the screen, we can see that 40% of individuals working in private equity and venture capital firms are women. This is across all genders, all functions, all roles, 40%, which doesn't sound so bad. However, when you look at it by seniority, we can see that only 20% of senior professionals are women, and that isn't that great when you think that the workforce is broadly 50-50 male-female in the UK. That figure rises as we go through as you kind of go down the seniority. But when we're looking at the industry as a whole, that junior number is pushed up quite a bit by quite a lot of non-investment professionals who are female. As the investment team skills are what really differentiates private equity and venture capital from other industries, let's focus in on what those numbers are telling us. So if we step forward, let's look at the gender diversity progress. And so one of the headline figures that that's often quoted is the proportion of women in senior investment roles. We've been doing this study for a number of years now. This is actually the third edition of our gender-based study. The first study was in 2018. And at that point, only 6% of senior investment roles were held by women. When we did the study a couple of years ago, it was 10%. And now in 2023, the equivalent figure is 11%. Those are all for UK, including European offices. If we look at just the UK figures, which we've got for the first time this year, that goes up to 12%. So it's really quite a positive story of progress, although, let's be honest, 12% isn't that high. So there's still quite a bit more to do. Let's step forward and look at those figures for investment teams within the different levels of seniority. On the slide, we've got the figures from 2021, so you can see that there is progress at every level. And although the progress at the senior levels might not look that high, 1 percentage point increase. What we're really encouraged by is the fact that there's quite a notable increase in proportion of women working at both the mid and the junior levels. And that, I think, bodes really well for the future pipeline. Private equity and venture capital, it is an apprenticeship industry. You do learn by doing. It's very difficult to parachute in a senior person who hasn't had several years of experience doing this stuff. So this is why the pipeline is really crucial. That being said, we've still got 13% firms with male-only investment teams, and that's looking across the UK and European offices. Let's dive into the numbers a little bit deeper by adding in the figures onto the slide, looking at women in investment roles. These are the larger firms, so assets under management greater than 100 million. Again, here we can see progress, and that, I think, is really encouraging. Unsurprisingly, the larger firms generally have a smaller proportion of all-male investment teams, just because their teams are larger, much more likely to be able to have at least one woman when you add it in. Conversely, when we look at the smaller firms, they're much more likely to have smaller investment teams, and therefore a greater proportion of individuals greater proportion of firms who have male-only investment teams. And we'd like to hope that as those firms grow and develop, they do continue to diversify their teams. Let's have a look at UK office gender diversity. So this is people who are physically working in the UK. The figures here are slightly better for the UK only versus UK including Europe. So that's the 12% senior women that I spoke about before. And indeed at the mid and junior levels, it's also slightly higher. The 2021 figures on the slide are UK and Europe figures. So it's not an exact like-for-like comparison, but we do know that it's broadly indicative and it's helpful to show trends. If we quickly put up the equivalent figures for the larger firms and smaller firms, let's pop them both at once. Again, we can see that certainly for the larger firms, there's been some improvement. And for the junior firms, it's a bit more mixed. There's good improvements at the mid-level and broadly similar-ish at the smaller level. But they, certainly at the junior level for the smaller firms, it's an okay-ish number. Let's move on. So what we wanted to do here was do a really interesting comparison, which is new for this year, to compare the UK versus European data by individual country. This is the first time we've been able to do this. The data that's presented is from the Level 2022 data set. Pam and the team have spent the last 12 months, or perhaps even a little longer, gathering data across all of their European chapters, from France, Spain, Sweden, Denmark, etc. And this allows us to benchmark by country. The UK is in the top third or so at all levels. So on one hand, that's quite a good place to be. It can give us a nice, warm, fuzzy glow. On the flip side, on the other side, it shows that more can be done, and it shows that there are other countries out there where maybe we can learn from. Let's step forward and take a look at ethnicity now. So one thing to be very conscious of ethnicity data is that unlike gender, the sample size is not that big. Only 99 firms are able to give us ethnicity data on their UK offices. And just to be clear, I'm presenting UK only data here. The sample size for the UK in terms of individuals was around 2,500 people. We've taken only individuals who have given a positive declaration of ethnicity. So if an individual was surveyed by their employer and they say, oh, I prefer not to declare my ethnicity, and that comes to us, well, we take that out for the numbers. So these are proportions of declared ethnicity. We can see that around 80% of the population that we have within our sample, the 2,500 people, that's around 80% people define as white. And the next largest cohort is Asian with around 10%. It's not clear what the benchmark should be for ethnic representation within private equity and venture capital, but the figures here won't really surprise anyone who's worked in the industry. Let's have a quick look at the figures by seniority. So here we can see, and there's quite a lot of figures on the slide, so I do apologise, but if we look at all roles, so this is investment and non-investment team, The top figure is the 18% non-white, so the 82 on the previous page, and you can see that broken down by different ethnicities. When we look at the senior levels, however, it does drop quite a lot. I mean, only 10% of senior individuals are Black, Asian, or other ethnicities, and within that, the number of Black individuals in particular is very, very low. Also on screen, you can see the breakdown between investment teams and non-investment teams. We've really, because of the sample size, we've really focused most of our analysis on the total population for ethnicity, but we did do a little look and see if there's a material difference between investment teams and non-investment teams for ethnicity, and the answer is not really. Non-investment professionals slightly more likely to define as ethnicities other than white, but not hugely. Let's move forward to take a look at bringing together gender and ethnicity. So what one might call intersectionality, women from different backgrounds. So looking at the green bubbles, that looks at just female representation by ethnicity across the total workforce. The 40% overall female will be familiar from the very first slide that I sent you. But when we look at female individuals across all roles and all different seniority levels, only 8% are female and other ethnicities, i.e. non-white. And then individuals within our sample who define as female and Black, that's only 1.3%. When we look at the senior workforce, so only senior professionals, but investment and non-investment professionals, we know that 20% of that is female. We are only 3% of that is female and have different ethnic backgrounds. And quite disappointingly for the UK, there were 0 senior Black women in our sample in the UK. When we looked at Europe as well, there were 3. And we found that a bit shocking, but perhaps not that surprising. And clearly that's something that we as an industry need to change over the coming years. I'd now like to invite the panel to return to get their perspectives on the numbers, why diversity matters, and how we can actually make a difference and change things. Thank you all for joining me today. Lovely to see you back. So my first question is to Pam, as one of my co-authors in the study. Like me, you're a big fan of data and having good data to tell the story. What was your reaction to the response rates that we got?
Thanks, Suzi. And actually, I was delighted with the response rates. As you said, we've been collecting data since 2018. This is our 3rd report, and each time the response rate has been increasing. And this time we had a 45% increase in the number of firms who gave us gender diversity data. It's a big increase, 268 firms. I know we also collected data through data scraping, but in those firms willing to actually fill in the survey and provide that data, we know they've got a lot of other demands on their time. That was very impressive. When it came to ethnicity, this is the 2nd time that we've asked for ethnicity data. And as you said in the presentation, the numbers are still low, but it was a 73% increase in firms who were willing and able to provide that data. So firms are now collecting data. So I'm encouraged. I think it's good progress. I think it shows that firms understand the importance of collecting, measuring, monitoring data. There's so much more to do though. So great first steps. We want to see that number increasing year on year and not having to do web scrapes to find the missing data.
I, for one, would greatly enjoy not having to do the web scrape, for sure. Michael, as Chief Executive of BVCA, we talk to our members all the time. We have all our committees. What are you seeing in terms of engagement on the topic of diversity and inclusion?
It has become much more central to everything that we do in terms of our activities. You know, we've got 2 core purposes at the BVCA. One of them, of course, to represent the industry to our key stakeholders in government, parliament, the media and elsewhere. And that is a theme we'll come back to, I'm sure, later in our discussion. But in terms of the the primary purpose, the reason we were set up 40 years ago, is to bring the industry together, to network, to share best practice and make sure we're focused on the right issues. I think it's a really important part of what's happened in recent times, that the issue of ESG, and particularly within that about diversity and inclusion, has become much more central to training that we offer and people participate in, and the events that we take place in, and I hope too, practicing what we preach by the way that we at the BVCA, our council, our committees and so on also operate. And I think that the participation, the demand for what is going on is hugely important. We have a dedicated diversity and inclusion series of events that are taking place all through the year. Our annual conference, the summit, always has a big central part. I mean, it used to be almost discrete part of what was going on. It's now really threaded through every piece of what we do at the summit. And when you look ahead, we have in a few weeks' time, 23rd of May, our ESG conference that will again put this issue front and central. We're absolutely thrilled at the fact that the conference as a whole, from half a day, has extended to full a day. We could probably do it over 2, and we will again be looking at this, not just for the sake of talking about it, but as is the theme of much of what is in the report and the themes that other people work on, how do we actually get best practice better understood and a reality across the industry?
Michael. Cheryl, just to keep warning, I'm going to ask you a question to look at the gender results in a moment, but just a quick reminder to everyone who's on listening in, you can send in questions on the chat. I got told off because I'd prepared too many questions, but we'd love some live questions, and I'll do my best to ask those to the panel as we go. So please do send them in. So Cheryl, you saw the numbers that I put on screen. Senior investment professionals are women, particularly in, there's something that's been really key to you in terms of throughout your career and sort of helping promoting women and making sure that they can thrive in what, to be honest, is quite a tough industry. And we saw that the proportion of senior professionals went from 6% to 10%, and now we're 11 or 12%, depending which data set you went for. You've been working in private equity since 1998, I believe. Can you put these figures in context for your career?
Sure. So I think we should celebrate where progress has been made. So as you say, progress at the senior investing level for women is slow, and as you commented earlier on, this is an apprenticeship-based industry, so we're never going to see the numbers at the top of the industry move quickly. What's great to see is that we're seeing them move in the right direction. The other number that I wanted to celebrate is the fact that we now have 20% of women in all senior roles, so there are an increasing number of women around the table in decision-making roles, which I think is super important. And those women are amazing role models for all of the other women in the industry. The other area where I think we've made great progress actually as an industry, we've moved junior investment professionals from 27% in 2018 to 38% now. And, the 3 areas we focus on at Level 20 is to attract, retain and promote women in the industry. So I think the industry has received the message loud and clear that having more women and more diverse talent more broadly in the industry is super important. I know we're going to come on and talk about that, obviously in a lot more detail. And their hiring practices have changed to reflect that and have been successful, which I think is great. And also just to call out the fact that in a broader context, when we read about the Great Resignation, the fact that you have collected more data from more firms this time, and we have an increasing number of both increasing percentage of women in senior roles, but also an increasing number of absolute women in senior roles in the context of a broader economy where we're seeing the reverse. I think that there's much to be celebrated, but as we know, still much to be done. We are by no means done in terms of kind of seeing the amount of change in diverse talent that we want to see at the senior levels in the industry.
Would you be able, I mentioned on the slides that you had done the research across your European chapters. Could you tell us a bit about that and what learnings there might be from the results of those studies?
Sure, and this is why we're so excited, because for the first time we actually have the granularity of not just the UK but 13 other European countries. And we gathered data in 2022 through a web scrape exercise, it wasn't a survey, on 1,000 officers across those 13 countries, covering 10,000 or more investment professionals. So if you combine that with the UK data, we've got over 15,000 investment professionals covered in the data. And the UK's doing okay, you know. If we look at it, the UK is on average a couple of percentage points above the European average at every level, a bit more at the junior level, so that's great. But the benefit of gathering this data on a consistent basis across Europe is the granularity, because that data hides a multitude of different positions. Some countries are doing better than us. For example, in France, 15% of all senior investment roles are held by women. That's really good. Spain's 13%. At the other end of the scale, we have Germany at only 4%, so they have more to do. And then you look at the junior level, the average at 38% for the UK is really, really good. But Norway and Sweden have got 43% of all junior roles held by women. And I would say they've probably cracked it in the main. Then you look at Denmark, which sits next to them at only 21%. So the benefit of gathering the data is to look at it in granular level and then to have discussion and debate with the countries, with our focus groups, with the local bodies, with the firms, to say, why is it different? What lessons can we learn? And what can we implement? What France is doing, what Spain is doing in other countries to bring everybody up. And that debate will continue. We've just released the focus group report that's on the Level 20 website. And I encourage people to look at the granularity of what you can do in your local office to help improve the attraction, where necessary, retention and promotion of diverse talent.
Thank you, Pam. That's a very significant piece of work. Rebecca, turning to you, you're a senior investment professional working in the industry for many firms over several years now. How does this resonate with you, and what's your take in particular of the progress at the mid and junior levels?
So I think it's very much to what Cheryl said earlier. It's about bringing people through the funnel. And we all know that this is a long-term career, and it starts very much outreaching early on to schools, universities, making people aware of it. So it's both a push as well as a pull. And I think there's a much greater focus on educating young females and people across many more different diverse backgrounds earlier on. So they're making the right choices about different career paths early in their career, thinking about the courses they're studying, getting internships. And that means there's a greater pool of applicant talents. Like many of the firms here, I'm sure we will have policies when we're talking to headhunter firms about shortlists, making sure you're getting that kind of diversity represented there, and that begins to flow into the junior levels of the organizations. But it will take time, and we're seeing great progress to see that improvement since 2018, but it's a long-term career, and we need to expect that. We need to provide the training and the support throughout people's careers. And I think that's where a lot of the recent shift has come in. We've got a great funnel at the junior end, and I think the metrics show that. It's now about really nurturing that talent across all different areas of diversity and making sure we're giving everyone the right opportunities so they can succeed and we can get those senior level metrics higher.
Couldn't agree more. Let's talk a little bit about the ethnicity data. And while we are rightly celebrating the increase in the number of firms able to give us the ethnicity data, frankly, the numbers are not great and they've not really moved since last time. And there's only 10% of individuals at senior levels who define themselves as ethnicities other than white. And, you know, that presents a challenge to the industry because, you know, we're missing out on huge swathes of the population. Well, turning to you, you've spoken in many forums in the past about the challenges you've had as a very senior Black person working in the industry. How do the figures resonate with you, and what more can we do about this? Because to be honest, it not changing in 2 years, isn't that great?
Thanks, Suzi. I think that let's look at the positives to start with. The positive is we're collecting the data and being incredibly transparent and clear about the data. I think Michael spoke about the fact, Michael and Pam spoke about the fact that, you know, aggregate data tends to hide much. So in one respect, if you sit there and say things like, it's good that we've got a number who identifies non-white, but then you start to break down and look at it, and I think probably the most shocking thing that came out was the 0% of women in senior roles who are black. I mean, that's a bit of a mark for us. We should not be happy about that. But let's celebrate the fact that we're being transparent and open and not trying to hide from this. I think that the push towards the gender diversity offers a sort of template to follow, and it sort of says several things. First, it takes time. You know, many of our panelists have talked about the fact that it's an apprentice-based industry. You can't parachute people in straight away, but that means we have to do a lot of work on the pipeline. And the fact is we have to treat this as a journey as opposed to destination. And there's a sort of hint sometimes that when people are focusing on things they find difficult, so, you know, diversity, you know, social ESG, these are not easy things to do. There's fatigue that can creep in. And I think we must guard against that, because if we don't focus on attracting, retaining, and then promoting, which is a 10-year cycle at the minimum, then we'll not move any of this data. I think the other thing as well is there's two aspects that we can really push on. One is looking at the environment and ensuring the environment is inclusive, truly inclusive, and that means a lot of role modeling, a lot of test and learn. So bringing people in, they test the environment, learn about the environment, feel comfortable in the environment, and ensuring that people, when they sort of in quotes go for this, and experiment is the wrong word, I know. They don't say the experiment failed because I didn't manage to, you know, attract someone, or I didn't manage to promote them or retain them. That's not the answer. The answer is actually back to this as a journey, not a destination.
Thanks, Wol. There's a question that's come through from the audience actually to you directly around whether the sort of 10,000 Black Interns project that you kind of kick-started back in summer 2020, has it had its desired impact in private capital, and what more needs to be done?
I mean, I think it has, in the sense that you must remember we started and it was 100. That was the actual initial target, and I think that first year we ended up placing over 250 people. So, you know, in a sense, that's made a difference from nothing. And today, if I look across the whole 10,000 Black Interns project, which now ranges across 26 sectors, replacing something like 2,500 interns, the private capital sector is overrepresented in that. You know, it had a head start, but it's still doing the do, and that means both continuing to place people, but also increasing the numbers of people being placed as well, and sort of showing the way. And one of the things we do is we sort of try and make sure that firms who have a really good experience for the internships are paired with firms that don't have such a good experience, by which I mean they don't quite know what to do and it hadn't quite had the impact. And I could say not all, but the vast majority of firms who are in the good and, you know, really best practice bucket have been in the private capital sector. They're leading the way, and that's rather odd when you think about the sort of wider economy. You might think the finance sector being conservative, we talk about apprentice space, but actually there's a feeling there, I think, that they need to do more, almost.
Thanks, Wol. I mean, well, I think you've covered that very eloquently in terms of ethnicity. I mean, let's move on to talk about, you know, the recommendations that we've got in the report, and how we can all work together to help create a diverse and inclusive investment industry. And there's various pieces of research out there that show that diverse teams make better decisions, avoid groupthink, and you know, so different perspectives. And from an investment perspective, if you're looking for opportunities, you might find that if you don't have, you know, you're just not open to certain ideas. So Pam, you know, can you comment on the sort of the challenge around retention and progression? Because we saw that, you know, we've got pretty good numbers in the pipeline, but it does drop off as you progress through the seniority levels.
Yes, and actually, I think it's worth mentioning, and looking back at level 20, yes, we have over 100 sponsored firms, and thank you all the GP and LP sponsor firms that we have. but we have over 5,000 individual members who work for GPs and LPs, which is a great base to actually ask them what it is really like, what do they need, what do they want, what works well. We did this back in 2020 with our Reaping the Rewards of Retention report, where we asked senior women why they stayed or why they left the industry, and we published that. We're a couple of months away from issuing our latest report, which is looking at our mid-level women, working with the LSE on, again, what it is that helps them to stay, progress, or drives them away. And I think it's really, really important to get those messages out there so that firms can have the practical insight into what works well and what helps, rather than trying to just build policies and ideas from scratch. And the other thing that's really important in our research is we're about to kick off our latest parental leave survey, last published a few years ago. That will be coming out later this year, asking good questions. And again, getting that information out there, what are firms offering? But then we aim to bring it back to our members. What is it that works best for you? Because that retention, especially through those middle, difficult, often dual career parenting years, for men and for women, it's not just a female issue, but it tends to fall there. Really, really important. So we're getting those insights, getting that research out.
Thanks, Pam. And Wol, coming back to you, I mean, we saw a similar pattern to the female representations we did in the ethnicity representation, with the proportion of people of non-white ethnicities dropping off as seniority increased. What can we do? What can firms do to kind of create a more inclusive culture, or other actions they can do to kind of really encourage these people to stay in the industry and grow and thrive?
And I think this is a really tough one, and it goes back to the sheer, it's a sort of numbers thing. The pipeline wasn't there 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So we're reaping what we sowed, basically, which is not very much, frankly. I think there's an acceleration process. I'm not, by the way, talking about positive discrimination in any way, shape, or form, but there's a sort of focus on what can we do to make the environment clearly supportive. I've heard some, frankly, mind-numbing comments about how someone needs to be more like that person. And the person I'm describing is a white male. And the person we're talking about is a black female. I mean, that's just never going to happen, right? And it's, by the way, being done in the most well-meaning manner. But in a sense, I think just that whole approach actually is very off-putting, and being really aware of that. So creating an inclusive culture is tremendously hard. It's sort of like, unfortunately become quite glib. We've got an inclusive culture. I would challenge anyone to say they can have an inclusive culture without really doing the work of maintaining it going forward. It's really hard work. And for me, it's the best thing is stay the course, stay on the journey. Remember why you're doing it. You want to access the most diverse talent because it leads to better investment decisions, which leads to better investment performance, which leads to greater success and rewards for your firm. That's fundamentally why you're doing it. And if you're not accessing that in this sort of world where we're in, which is volatile, that agility and resilience thing we're looking for will not be there. It's a key, Michael spoke about it. It's an important element of our business practice that we just need to really focus in on. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullet, there's no little lever you pull and it all gets fixed. It's relentless focus and measurement and transparency.
Rebecca, I know you're involved in the Level 20 mentoring program, which is can be part of creating an inclusive culture, although it's by no means the only thing one needs to do. Do you want to say a few words about that?
And I think it's an important feature that we don't have to just look after our own firms. It's about an industry-wide initiative, and the people we may be bringing on from either different diverse backgrounds or different genders, they may end up in other firms later on, but actually we're still building a more diverse industry overall. And I think that the mentoring is a great opportunity for people to get that career advice in often a more open and transparent way that they may not feel with their in their own firm. They can have some of those discussions with senior professionals. We'd obviously love to. We all aspire to be a sort of transparent and open culture, but it's absolutely valuable to have people and mentors in other firms who can give you that advice. And frankly, having done it myself for a number of years, we can learn a lot. When you hear the perspectives of more juniors in other firms, they can be very honest. You can see what other firms are doing that works and also what doesn't work. So I think it's been a hugely valuable program, both the one-on-one mentoring as well as the peer group mentoring, giving young females an opportunity to network with their colleagues and share those kind of experiences.
Perhaps I can just add to that as well, because over 66% of the mentors in the Level 20 mentoring program are men. And the feedback we get from our mentors, both male and female, is how invaluable the mentoring process is to helping them understand the issues that a different generation of people are facing. So it does work both ways.
Definitely.
Jill, did you want to come in on that as well?
Sure. Just to kind of build on what Wol said and another kind of practical thing we can do. So let's remember why we're doing this. We're doing this because diverse talent drives better decision making, and in our industry, that's better investment returns. We would not let a CEO hire a board that all looked like them, which just never would let it. You know, our portfolio companies operate multidisciplinary teams very, very effectively to run their businesses, and yet we don't ever really learn from that. And I think to enable diverse talent to succeed, you have to stop doing what Wol said, which is kind of trying to make everybody be like a white middle-class man, right? You're hiring diverse talent because they bring something different. You have to create a culture where their difference can shine and be additive, as opposed to kind of beating it out of them. So that's kind of the first thing, which is easy to say and actually quite challenging to do when there are norms around communication styles in any organization. But a kind of a practical thing I think we can do on the gender side is just like more proactive resource allocation. We know that women have children. We're not going to do anything about that anytime soon. And for most of us, and myself included, when you do these jobs, you leave it late, right? So if you're probably going to have more than one, and you're going to have them quite close together because you left it late to get started. So what can you do as a firm? Well, firstly, if you've got a woman who's working on a deal, by the way, babies come when they want to come, not when you want them to come. So, and then, you know, has to go on maternity leave. Just because she wasn't there kind of in the final throes of negotiating that deal, she may have originated it, she may have played a big part in kind of the diligence. What's to stop her going onto that board when she comes back from a maternity leave? You know, she did a huge amount of the work. You should put her in a position to benefit from that. When I was really fortunate, when I had 3 children quite close together, each time I came back from my maternity leave, and by the way, a couple of times before I came back, somebody would send me an IM and say, look, when you get back, can you run with this one? So I came back to a pipeline. Now, some people might think, well, that's really intrusive sending you an IM when you're on maternity leave, but believe me, that's much better than turning up back in your first day back in the office. Somebody has stolen your pipeline. That's what it might feel like. And then you sit there with a pipeline, which is a blank sheet of paper. If you're going to have another baby in 2 years, perhaps you've got 18 months back in the office. If you come back to a blank sheet of paper of a pipeline, it might take you 18 months to work something up into a stage where it might happen. And by the way, then what happens? You don't get to execute it again, and then off you go. So let's kind of proactively resource women into situations that enables them to be professionally productive at the same time as they are, you know, going through those kind of years of having babies. And I don't want people to kind of think, oh, well, that's positive discrimination. Of course, it's not positive discrimination. It's just the practical reality of not kind of stealing opportunities from them. And I've seen it happen in so many times. I've seen women come back into the workplace when there's somebody junior has been put into their board role, and they've literally been told, oh, well, that person's stepped up. It's, you know, you have to earn your place again now. And that it's completely demotivating. And so I think, you know, our industry, we love kind of practical solutions to problems because we want things to be solved in the here and now. We're not going to be able to solve the senior women problem in the here and now if we don't have practical solutions to the retention point. And that is enabling women to be super productive during those years when they're having children.
That is such a great point, Cheryl, and one which sort of makes me smile, because the sort of upshot of not doing this is you just end up having a smaller talent pool to choose from. And if you're happy with that, great. But actually, my argument would be that leads probably to you demise your firm ultimately, because you're not sort of keeping up with what you need to keep up with, and getting that diverse, involvement in decision making that leads to better investment performance and ultimately better returns. Just flipping to the ethnicity sort of element, and try to come up with a practical example of some of the difficulty, but also I think sort of path towards understanding this inclusive culture. If you've got to sort of remember some of the people who are coming into our industry from other ethnicities, and I just take black, which is my experience, may not be white middle class. That experience doesn't actually follow. So the risk profile of the individual being in that firm is completely different. The support structure you have as a sort of middle class person is very different to working class. It's very different to working class and black. And that means your goal may be just to get to home ownership, for example, as opposed to, when people say take risks, push forward, get out there, that is sending the wrong signals, actually, because that person may be supporting not just themselves, but a wider family network. So just that little appreciation of what's actually going on, and I think it's two-way. So understanding a certain person's circumstance and bothering to actually ask, and it's not in an intrusive way, be quite careful how you do this, but so that you understand that when you compare that person to someone else, you're making the right comparison, as opposed to just saying they're not stepping up. Well, you don't understand their context, actually.
I think that's increasingly important when on topics such as parental leave, it shouldn't be just the female that this is being talked about with, and being able to have an open and transparent culture where men, women can talk about their ambitions for parenthood and who's going to take the leave. And I think there's some really good progress in lots of the policies among different firms to really encourage that behavior. And the easiest way for women to feel comfortable about taking maternity leave is for men also to be taking parental leave and also taking that step out of their career. And just to a very practical point, building on what Cheryl just said, we've just introduced a kind of mentoring scheme where we have a third-party firm that helps coach people that have gone on maternity leave and their managers. And so during their leave, they will have regular check-ins with that professional and the manager that works with them in the office to help them through that process and to be able to have that discussion. Would you like to receive an information memorandum? Would you like to go to your AGM next week? You've only had a baby 2 months ago. Would you like to do that? Some people are thrilled and very keen to actually get back in. Others want to be left alone. Both are fine. And I think we have to stop assuming that all women are going to want the same paths and all men are going to want the same paths, and recognize there's all sorts of behaviors, backgrounds, family setups that we need to look after. We're also going to get into elder care. People are going to have parent responsibilities as well. And so as responsible employers that want to nurture the best talent, we need to be able to have the conversation with our teams so that they can all feel comfortable admitting and talking about the issues they face, and then we can build policies around them that can support them.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's an awful lot of food for thought on sort of retention and progression. We touched earlier on sort of building the pipeline, focusing on recruitment and outreach. Michael, if I could just come to you about, if you could speak a bit about some of the wider initiatives that the BVCA and also the industry more broadly is supporting to get people into, well, initially financial services, because that's often the hunting ground, so to speak, for new talent.
If I may, Suzi, do a little segue from what we've all just been discussing, and I make the obvious point that we might miss because this is a level 20 and BVCA inspired webinar. The work of level 20 is hugely important in all of this, and the wide network of people and organisations, people in the industry and beyond, not just in the UK but across Europe, that it interacts with. I think the work that Pam has done, and Cheryl as chair and others before her, has been hugely important, and working in partnership with the BVCA, critical to making sure this set of issues is given the right attention and developed further. And I'm really excited that Gurpreet Mankur, who was working with me until recently here at the BVCA, is succeeding Pam and will build on the leadership she showed here at the BVCA as she takes on that role. And where GURPS was really critical here at the BVCA was, to your point, being part of that wider outreach. We're rightly focusing here on how the industry is behaving, how it's developing, how it's making sure that it's actually doing the things that will guarantee its future success by making sure it embraces diversity, makes this an inclusive industry, and then can get those fantastic returns for the generations to come. But a lot of what we do as an industry depends on what I always call our license to operate. And that is something that we only get because people in government and regulators and elsewhere think that we are worth it. And increasingly, the scrutiny of the industry, as with other parts of the economy, is focused on behaviours and how we actually represent the country in which we operate. So when you look then at some of the initiatives that have been taking place in recent times, the Investing in Women Code, led by the Treasury, is basically and rightly a challenge to financial services and others to say, how are you supporting the role of women, female entrepreneurs across senior levels in the industry? We at the BVCA are proud to be signed up to that, and very conscious of our responsibilities under it, and other firms are likewise. The Rose Review Board, pompously named after Alison Rose, the CEO of NatWest. I mean, Alison and those working with her at the moment, the government minister is Kevin Honorick. I attended my first board meeting succeeding GURPS in that role just a week or so ago. The work that Alison Rose and those who have created the review process have been doing is hugely significant. So challenging not just our industry, but the broader financial services industry to focus in on what makes a difference. So just to give a flavour of that from the meeting we had a week or so ago, British Business Bank has been doing some work looking at what actually makes a difference in promoting female entrepreneurs. Strangely enough for us, considering the theme today, the recurring themes are diverse investment committee, diverse investment team, and making sure there's data and accountability. So we're all focusing in on the same kind of themes, the same kind of methodology to make sure that what we are measuring gets counted and appreciated, and we then lead on from there. Part of that is also investor guidance, which has been available for VC firms, broader institutional investors and entrepreneurs. And that guidance that we are very much a part of in terms of getting set up and promoting, that's been refreshed this year, and making sure that to the themes of attracting, retaining and promoting diverse talent, that is the heart of what firms are doing. So the work we're focused on rightly about the industry today reflects a much broader focus in government and society about what has to be done to make sure that as a society we benefit from all the value that a properly diverse workforce can produce.
Suzi, can I just jump in on what Michael said, if that's okay? I mean, that license to operate phrase which you use, Michael, is so pertinent in the sense that there's a feeling in financial services more broadly, and specifically in private equity and private capital, where we've, as a sector, accrued quite a lot of gain, if you will. And there's a sort of feeling that that's due to our own skill and brilliance. Actually, it's much more simple than that. It's capital versus labor. If you look at the wider economic context, right, we're benefiting from the fact that we can actually increase our gains through accumulating capital, taking a cut of that, rather than actually working with our hands and what have you. And that license to operate thing, I think, is a really, because of that, it's incumbent on us to be better than everyone else. We can't say, and I don't think that's been happening in the past 20 years. In the last 5 years, I think we've woken up to the fact that actually people are looking really hard at what we're doing and saying, why do we need to have you, accumulating that element of the overall economic cake? And so I sort of say, if we don't do this work, our license to operate will go, or it'll be so difficult to operate in here, and rightly so. We have to be the exemplars, and coming back to 10,000 black interns, in talking to people in financial services and explaining that you have a chance here to do something immediate that will have impact, and actually you can now start to say, we are on this journey, is a great defense. I mean, if you want to be the negative, or a very good positive, which is a beginning of your journey to change the way your firm operates so that it can be modern and looking to the future. So it's so important, Michael, that you keep saying that story about the license to operate. and reminding all our colleagues across the sector, we have a license to operate for society. It is not a given.
Absolutely. And thinking about practical things that firms can do, Pam, are there any other organisations that you've come across that would be particularly useful for the audience to connect with particularly around recruitment and outreach?
Yes, I mean, so Level 20, we work with GAIN, Girls Are Investors, who've got a wider program, and we look after the private equity piece of that. Similar to Wol's 10,000 Black Interns, it's looking at finding different people from different socioeconomic backgrounds who don't necessarily even know that private equity exists, and finding people to give them an experience on this, frankly, wonderful industry with fantastic careers, and take that back into their communities, their schools, their business schools, their universities, to spread the word and to encourage people to come in there. So SEO London also do the same. So I think, yes, we're doing quite well at gender into people coming into junior roles, but we're right, we have to spread the broader diversity agenda into those junior roles and encourage a much broader base of people to apply, both visible and invisible diversity.
Can I just build on what Pam and Wol just said? So I actually spoke at a conference yesterday and made the point that I was the first in my family to go to university, and that for most of my career, more people commented on my accent than my gender, and that when I graduated, I didn't even know what an investment bank was. I had never heard of one. Would have been no chance of me going to work in investment banking, whether they would have selected me or not. So that understanding the context of where you're, to really broaden the pool that Wol made and is trying to achieve through 10,000 Black Interns and the work that Pam and the team at Level 20 have been doing with GAIN, that kind of just raising awareness, putting private equity on somebody's radar is the early in their kind of career and their career consideration set. It has to be crucial to building the longer term pipeline. It really does. Otherwise, you will continue to get super smart people that come through investment banks, but if people don't know that that's a route or don't know what the potential routes are into private equity, then we will never kind of solve this problem long term in terms of the license to operate, helping with the government's levelling up agenda and those things. And hilariously, my son said to me the other day, who clearly now is a white middle class kid from a private school, how on earth did you get a job in private equity in the way that only teenagers can kind of burst your bubble? Question that I ask myself quite often, and I slightly worry that I wouldn't get one today, which is a different point. So we do need to really keep focusing on this broader outreach point as well.
Thanks, Cheryl. Let's move on to, we have two more recommendations, one of which was around building an inclusive culture. We've talked about that quite a bit. So I just wanted to chat a bit around our final one, which is around continuing to enhance transparency of policies, processes and data. Rebecca, if we could come to you briefly. We talked a bit in the prep call around what Oakley were doing around, around thinking about the right kind of policies that they wanted to have in place. Can you tell us a bit about that? You are mute.
We've just gone through a very rigorous process of updating our policies to reflect parental leave, adoption leave, menopause issues, elder care, and many of them we would like to think people could have talked to us and we'd have helped them through that process and that time. But what's been really important is actually publicly stating that we have these policies, and whilst many of them won't be relevant for people in the team, it acknowledges that we're thinking about them. And we're putting on our website so that people can come and they can look and say, gosh, this is a firm that's actually thinking about this broad set of issues. And even if it's not relevant to me today, it could be relevant in the future. So I think that signaling process is actually really important. Although it's nice to have a team where you feel it can be informal and everyone can talk to you, actually, as the firms and the profession gets more institutional, and as Michael's made it so clear, we are a public role model in many ways, doing these kind of actions actually, I think, are very powerful.
Thanks, Rebecca. Pam, we talked about data a bit at the beginning. Let's come back to that. As part of the work that we've done here, we've produced quite a few companion resources to go alongside the actual report, which will be available on our website from 10 o'clock. Pam, can you tell us a bit about the 3 companion resources we've prepared?
Yes, I mean, it's important that this isn't just a report, but we want to provide practical guidance to firms. So the report is there, will be available now for people to download. Also, the data collection tools, be it for gender or for ethnicity, if firms haven't created their collected their ethnicity data, having a focus group, having a discussion, having facilitated groups and using the tools, they're there so that you can actually start on that journey of data collection. It's not just collection of data, you have to have discussions about it, why you're doing it and what you're going to do with the data to engage people. And then one that I'm really, a fan of is the comparison tool. You can actually look at both the BVCA Level 20 comparison tool. You can look at the Level 20 for the European countries, individual comparison tools, and you can actually very simply input your AUM size, your male and female, senior, mid, junior, investment, non-investment, and compare yourself to your peer group in country by AUM size. And I'd encourage people to do that and to look at where they are and where their peers are and where they need to go to. And I also think it's a very good way for LPs to look at firms on a very consistent basis. And there's no place to hide. People can actually look at it, compare them to peers, and if they're not doing well, they have to have a strategy of what they do differently in the coming years. So please go ahead and download all of those, use them freely and wisely.
Thank you, Pam. Well, I've got even more questions, but we're nearly out of time. So I'll call a close to the panel discussion now. The 2023 report is now live on the BVCA and Level 20 website, along with the companion resources. Our intention from BVCA and Level 20 is to rerun the analysis in 2 years, and we'd really hope to see continued progress in both gender and ethnicity. If you have any thoughts, comments, feedback on the report, you can contact the research teams at BVCA or Level 20. The contact details are in the report. Finally, a few thank yous. Firstly, to all the BVCA Level members who gave us data, attended focus groups and the like. Without you, there would be no study. We'd be standing here sort of spouting off and not really having anything to ground it in. So thank you. Secondly, to the members of the BVCA and Level 20 research teams, we've got many people behind the scenes doing an awful lot of work to pull this together. So thank you to you all. Thirdly, thanks to Cheryl, Michael, Rebecca, Wol and Pam for joining us today. I think the discussion probably could have carried on for another hour. I did get warned at the beginning that I had a lot of people who had a lot to say, and that proved to be absolutely true. Before we finish, I'd like to give a personal thank you to Pam. Pam has led Level 20 since 2019. She stepped down as CEO last month, but has kindly stayed around to shepherd this project to its conclusion. She's been instrumental in kind of getting the foundations for a really good data set, not just in the UK, but in Europe. And Pam, personally, I've really enjoyed working with you. So thank you very much. And finally, thank you to you, the audience, for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. If you've got any other questions, do email them in. Please share the report, please use the tools, and we hope to be back here in a couple of years with more positive progress to report. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.